Awesome. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. So if you haven't met Phil yet, Phil Hall is a contributing editor for the online magazine Film Threat and the author of several film-related books, including the Encyclopedia of Underground Movies, Independent Film Distribution, The History of Independent Cinema, The Greatest Bad Movies of All Time, and In Search of Lost Films. He's also written for the New York Times, New York Daily News, and American Movies Classics magazine. He's also a member of the Online Film Critics Society. Phil, it's great to have you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. So tell us about your background, how you got started in writing and film.
Well, I started writing in film when I was in college, which was more than a few years ago. And I was on the student newspaper at Pace University. And I didn't intend to be writing about movies. I was just a general assignment reporter. And I was given an assignment one day to interview an administrator in the school. And that person, for whatever reason, did not make himself available to me. And my deadline was coming up and I was a bit panicked. So I went to my editor and I said, I can't get in touch with this person and I don't want to leave you with a hole in the newspaper. I said, but I don't know what made me say this. I said, I just saw a new movie that came out. It was called My Favorite Year, starring Peter O'Toole. I liked it. Would you like me to do a review of that? And my editor said, sure, why not? So I wrote the review in lieu of the news story. They published it. My editor liked it, and he asked me to keep writing reviews. And so I started as a film writer because that administrator wouldn't speak to me. I often thought if that person was in his office and I got the story, where would my career have gone?
You might be a journalist or something.
I'd be a real journalist, yes, instead of a film.
That's awesome. That's great. So how did your career kind of evolve from there?
Well, from there, I started freelancing when I was in college with professional media. When I was 20 years old, my first professional film review was published in the New York Daily News. And from there, I started doing more items for the Daily News for a number of years. I started writing for a newspaper called the Organica Quarterly, which was published by a company called Aubrey Organics. Sadly, it's no longer with us. The company's there, but the newspaper isn't. I wrote for Wired magazine for 5 years, doing film and video reviews. I started reaching out to other publications as well. In the year 2000, I was on Film Threat as a contributing writer. This was the online version of Film Threat, not the magazine version. I was there for about 15 years. Film Threat went offline in 2015. It's going to be coming back either later this year or early next year. At the moment, I'm writing for a site called Cinema Craze and also for Film Snobbery, and for the Video Librarian magazine as well. I'm also more than a film writer. As much as I love writing about movies, I'm also a financial writer. I write for National Mortgage Professional magazine and for an online site called Profit Confidential, where I cover the U.S. stock market.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So it sounds like you've got a ton of experience in all areas of writing.
I have. I've also written about history and medicine and sociology and marketing and religion. I've covered small business. I run a site called Business Superstar, which focuses on entrepreneurs and business startups as well. I used to run a public relations agency for 10 years, so I'm familiar with business both from being a journalist covering the subject and actually being a businessman owning my own business.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So, one of the kind of common piece of advice a lot of writers get is, really specialize and focus in one area and just become like the leader in that area. And it sounds like you've kind of taken a different approach where you're the expert in all these different areas. Is there a reason for that? Is it just your passions took you that place, or were there financial reasons for expanding?
Well, there are two reasons for that. First, as a writer, I'm naturally curious about things. And so I'd like to learn about different ideas, different people, different experiences. From a professional aspect, I realized that if I'm going to be pigeonholed writing about one subject, nobody's going to take me seriously if I want to try something else. Many years ago, at the early part of my career, I was briefly with a technology newspaper called Electronic News. I was only there for 4 months. I was laid off during some budget cuts. But after that, it was very difficult for me to get work with other publications because they saw me as a technology writer, even though I was only with Electronic News for 4 months. And I realized then that I have to have as diverse a background as possible, because if I'm in a situation where I'm out of work, I don't want to be stuck not getting hired because they're saying, oh, he's a tech writer, or oh, he's a movie critic or whatever. I want to have a portfolio which is as thick and varied as imaginable.
That's a great idea. So you really want to just create this kind of persona, this resume where you were proven to have published work in all these different areas, and so that you could essentially take any job in the writing industry because you could say, hey, I've done this before, so I'll be good for this job.
I do, and I have different audiences for my work. I'm also a movie actor, too. I've done about 20 movies, mostly no-budget horror films, where I play the creepy villain who gets very badly killed at the end. And it's funny because my friends in the movie world are baffled that I'm a financial writer, but my friends in the financial world are enthused that I'm a horror movie actor. And every time I'm at a financial conference, nobody asks me questions about what I'm covering. They say, what movies are you in? What have you been doing lately? Have you been killed in a new movie? So they find that hilarious.
That's great. So, well, I'm sure you get a lot of new aspiring authors and writers coming to you for advice. What is the most common advice that you give to someone new starting out as a writer?
Starting out as a writer, know what you're doing. One of the problems of the internet age is do-it-yourself publishing. And the problem with that is you don't have somebody editing your work. A lot of people say, I'll start a blog, I'll put stuff on Tumblr or whatever, some forums, and the work is full of mistakes. It's badly written, the typographical errors. I was fortunate because I came up in a somewhat distant time where I would have to submit my writing to editors, and they would make sure that there were no mistakes, the style was correct. I've got a lot of good feedback that way. A lot of people who are new to writing don't get feedback. They figure I can just self-publish on the internet, or I could self-publish a book through CreateSpace. And the quality control is non-existent. So if you're going to start as a writer, have a good mentor, have somebody who will be honest about your work. If you submit it, they'll take a look at it and they'll make suggestions, what works, what doesn't work, where there's room for improvement. There's a young fellow I'm working with now who's an aspiring writer, and he's sent me his work, and I've been grading it. And I've told him exactly what I like about it, and if there's something I'm not too certain about, I give my opinion on how it can be changed. Because one of the things I've noticed with a lot of writers, particularly professional writers, they're very touchy when you say, this isn't working, I think this needs to be edited, because you have to explain why the change is needed, because you just can't say, it stinks, do it over, or it stinks, I think I could do it better. Writers are, I guess many ways, are like chefs. They become very, very protective of what they create. And if you don't think this is the greatest thing that's being served, they get upset or worse.
Absolutely. So what advice would you give to someone that, or how would you go about approaching, getting an editor to work with, getting someone who can give you that advice, getting a mentor today, because it's a very different environment, especially in journalism, than it was when you got started?
Well, it depends on where you are and who you're working with. If you're still in school and you have a professor who has the time to look at your work, obviously that would be wonderful. If you have friends who have been published, by all means, share your work with them. And if you are new to the field, submit work even to community newspapers or to a website that you might admire, whether it covers just general news or specialized subjects. Send the work over and ask them what their opinion is of your work. And don't be afraid to ask people what they think of what you're doing. You may not like the answer you get back, but that's the only way you're going to get feedback.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I found in business and really in life is that you just have to ask for what you want. And so if you're not constantly asking other people to give you advice, to give you help, to publish your work, no one's going to do it, right? Unless you ask.
Well, I was told once the only silly question is the one that never gets asked. So don't think any request is too ridiculous or too self-serving. If you don't ask, you're not going to know. And otherwise, you're going to just go through your career or your life thinking you're doing the right thing when 9 times out of 10, you probably aren't.
Absolutely. So how do you take personal criticism and feedback on your work? How do you kind of process that and not get emotional and actually decide to make changes?
Well, there are two types of criticism. There's constructive criticism. If I'm writing something and somebody says, I think you're missing information here, or does this need to be fixed? That criticism is very helpful because it's designed to improve the work. If somebody comes out and says, you stink, well, that's not very constructive criticism at all. And I've gotten people saying the nastiest things about my writing. There was one person who, he said online, he said he was a professor at some college in the Midwest, and he told me I should consider giving up my career and taking a new job collecting shopping wagons in the Kmart parking lot. To which I wrote back to him saying, I wish you had given me that advice earlier, because I could make more money working for Kmart than I would as a writer.
That's great. So yeah, it sounds like you have a kind of sense of humor about the whole thing, especially when
Yeah.
it's someone who's not being constructive.
Because if you're going to take yourself too seriously, it's going to be a problem. And nobody wants somebody who's constantly touchy about their work. I've dealt with writers who just could not deal with what I thought was an effort to improve work that was somewhat shaky to begin with. So you have to have a sense of humor. You have to realize you're not going to please everybody. But if you're comfortable with who you are, you could take anything that's thrown at you.
Definitely. Have you, I mean, I know you've had a long career, and I know you've seen a lot of other writers coming up in the business and succeeding in the business. Have you seen anyone just kind of bomb their career? And if so, what did they do that really destroyed their chances of success?
Well, I saw somebody, he's not a writer, he's in the broadcast field, and I'm obviously not going to name names because I don't want you to get sued for slander, but this person uses social media in the most corrosive way imaginable. He's bad-mouthing a lot of people. He's a regional broadcast personality, for lack of a better word, and he has said nasty things about his competition. He said nasty things about people who have been on his program who he didn't like. And people have gotten very tired of this constant bad-mouthing that he's been doing online. And he had gotten himself into a rather sticky criminal situation. And based on that, several people actually went on Facebook saying, do not appear on his show. And this created a problem for him because guests started canceling, or they wouldn't respond to inquiries to be on the program. And it got to a point now, he just has, his show is still online. It's an online radio broadcast, but he has just 3 or 4 of his close friends who are not entertainers talking with him every week. So the program has become monotonous, and he really has nobody to blame but himself, because his own personality and his misuse of social media created a situation where nobody wants to be with him.
Gotcha. So that's a great lesson to learn from, right? Is, don't make everyone really angry just because you have some opinions that you want to share, right? You have to think before you publish something.
You have to realize too, if you're going to be working not only in writing or broadcasting, but any field, if you have a lousy reputation, it's going to come back to haunt you. I was making a film a couple of years ago, and during a break in the shooting, I was sitting with a friend of mine, who was an actor out of Los Angeles who was visiting, and we were watching a TV show, I think it was Stargate. And there was an actor who was playing one of the aliens, and he was buried under this ridiculous makeup, but he had a very recognizable voice. And I sort of thought I knew who it was, and I had said to my friend, isn't that person so-and-so? And this person is actually an Oscar-winning actor. And my friend said, yeah, that's him. And I said, well, what is he doing dressed up like an alien in this silly sci-fi show? Apparently, this actor has such a poor reputation that he can't get good roles in Hollywood. And even though he has an Academy Award on his mantle shelf, he wound up basically buried under all this latex makeup, being an alien on a grade B TV show. And that's because his reputation stinks. He's considered to be a very difficult person to work with. And I've seen this happen with people not only in show business, but in other businesses as well that have nothing to do with entertainment. They get a crummy reputation and nobody wants to work with them. And somehow or other they muddle by on the fringes of their industries when they really should be front and center.
Definitely. So can you give us some examples of something someone's done to kind of ruin their reputation? Like, what are these people doing that are kind of turning everyone else off and turning everyone else against wanting to work with them?
Difficult personalities, making difficult demands, not being a team player. I know team player is a cliche, but If you're in an office or if you're in a collaborative effort, you just can't be the team captain all the time. Sometimes you have to work with people. And if you're perceived as being touchy or prickly to work with, or you don't do your job or you're not pulling your weight, that works against you. If you're like that fellow I mentioned earlier who goes on social media and shoots his mouth off, that's going to come back to haunt you as well. You know, there's an old saying, I'm sure everybody's mother or grandmother said, that if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. That's really the best advice. If you can't be positive, if you can't be supportive, button your lip, because if you're going to be making fun of people or talking trash about people or acting like a diva, you're not going to get very much respect.
That makes a lot of sense. That's great advice. So what about for authors who want to break into the film business, or writers who want to break into the film business? Do you have any advice for them? Because it seems like out of all the different areas of writing, that's the one that's like most people want to get into, and it seems to be the hardest to actually get into.
Perseverance. I have so many rejection letters and phone slammed in my ears. I don't even want to think about it. It would depress me. As I said earlier, you're not going to have everybody love you. But if you believe in yourself and you have the talent and you do have a support base behind you, whether it's friends or family who think you can do it, keep going at it. There's no such thing as an overnight success in any industry, certainly in writing. And you need to just push ahead and realize there are going to be people who appreciate what you do and they'll publish your work, and there'll be people who will pass on your work, and there'll be people who will really denigrate your work. But just keep at it, because if you're going to fold up in the face of criticism, you're not going to, obviously not going to get very far. But just be positive as well. I mean, if somebody's going to badmouth you, don't get into a tit-for-tat fight with people, because you're not going to win. And that's such a waste of energy and emotion. So if somebody is going to be extremely negative, it's best not to say anything than to get on somebody's bad side as well. And who knows, somebody who might be negative today could come back 6 months or a year if you make contact anew and take another look at your work, and they might change their mind of what they think of you.
Definitely. So what does your schedule look like then in terms of your writing career? So, you know, when do you write and when do you make these phone calls and you know, do the outreach to the journalists and the publishers and the producers and everyone? Can you give us kind of a glimpse into your schedule and what would you recommend for other folks?
My schedule, usually after breakfast, start working. And sometimes I could work as late as 10, 11 at night, taking breaks during the course of the day. I mean, obviously, being a writer is a sedentary job, which is not good for the body and not good for the spirit. So need to get out during the course of the day, whether to go to the gym or actually to drive by the gym and look at it so you can claim you were in the vicinity if not actually using the machines. Also go out to do whatever errands need to be done, walk the dog, groceries, etc. And just keep at it. I'm self-employed to a certain extent. I'm on the staff of several publications, but I have my own home office. And so I can set my own hours. So I don't need to clock in at 9, take the lunch break at 12, come back at 1, and then clock out again at 5. I might be working from, say, 8 till 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., but it's not sitting at the desk constantly through that. So I'm able to have a degree of mobility that a lot of office workers don't have.
Gotcha. So in terms of like learning and studying the craft, what would you recommend for folks who are new and starting out? I mean, besides like we talked about getting the mentor, it can be very, very important. But are there other resources or books or things that you found to be really valuable?
Well, my personal taste may not be other people's tastes. It's very important to read. And by reading, it could be newspapers, it could be magazines. Being this is an English language broadcast, don't just focus on American publications or websites. Look into British, Australian, Irish, any English language media outside of the United States, because there's always a very different approach to writing in other countries. One of my favorite magazines is The Economist, which is published in Great Britain. And they have a very different approach to a subject. In their case, it would be international politics and economics. But I love the language they use. I love how they look at subject matter. Also realize, look at people's work that you may not agree with on a philosophical basis. As a film writer, when I was growing up, one of my favorite writers was Pauline Kael from The New Yorker. Now, I never really agreed with anything she said. I actually thought she was something of a kook with her consideration of some movies, but she was an articulate kook, and she had a wonderful command of the language. And if I wasn't in lockstep with how she was looking at a movie, I could respect the way that she got her opinion across. She didn't just come out and say, oh, it sucked. She explained at depth why she felt that way. And that kind of writing, to me, works best. You don't see a lot of it on the internet, certainly not in entertainment, less so in business. I don't mind just sitting down and reading a long article, as long as the article is well thought out. If it's a news piece or a business piece, as long as it's well researched. I have actually found articles in major media, including the New York Times, where the research was all wrong, and I actually had made a whole list of where the mistakes were in terms of assumptions, in terms of wobbly quotes, in terms of sticking editorial into what's supposed to be objective news coverage. And that's another problem, too, of a lot of writing today, particularly from a news or a nonfiction approach, is that there's too much editorializing. I can make up my own mind. I just want the facts presented to me. I don't need to have snide comments or slant or spin put into coverage, whether it's certainly in the current political environment, or also coverage of major businesses as well.
Gotcha. So can you give some examples, maybe besides The Economist, where there are really great writers like that don't do the slander and the editorializing?
That's a good question. The Economist, well, for me, is very good. I used to like the Washington Post, but it's unfortunately, to me, it's sort of veered too much to the left. There isn't a lot of American publications I like. I do like, especially if you're a writer, there's a magazine called Poets and Writers, which is very good, and it actually provides a lot of insight for people. It focuses on, as its title would say, poets and writers, but in that case, fiction writers, not so much nonfiction. But you get an idea of the creative process and what people have to go through to put their books and their short stories together, and also to get to print as well. It's become over the years more business oriented because there's so much competition out there to get a book published. There's also a lot of self-publishing options that didn't exist a few years ago. So if you are a writer and you want to get into the field, Poets and Writers is probably a very good place to go.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That's great advice. We'll link to all these mentions in the show notes as well. So if you're looking for the links to all these resources, just go to publishingprofitspodcast.com. So Phil, I want to ask about your film career, right? Because I think a lot of people, dream about being in the film business, and it's probably one of the most common, requests when people like submit manuscripts to our publishing company. The most common thing they say is, "This would be perfect for film. This would be perfect for TV," right? And so, from your perspective, if you were reviewing a manuscript or a novel or a short story, what would make you say, wow, this really would be a good fit for film? This really would be a good fit for TV? What would make you say that about a story?
Well, I haven't been in that situation, but I would think character development, certainly, because you can't have a good film unless you have good characters. A lot of problems with movies today, not just today, but going back many years, you have one-dimensional characters, and you could say, oh, haven't I seen this someplace before? Because, yeah, these are the same stock characters you see in gangster films and horror films and comedy films and love stories. You need to have an original, compelling character to push a story if it's a fiction narrative. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter what else you throw in, whether you have the clever plot twist or snappy dialogue. If the characters aren't believable, the story is not going to be believable.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of films that have some really good, believable characters that you really think were unique?
Unique film? You're speaking contemporary or?
Any films, just so because I love watching films. I know a lot of our audience does too, so that we can actually go and take notes while we're watching the film. Okay, this is a unique character. Like, why is this unique? Why is this different from, the kind of the cookie cutter Hollywood approach?
All right. Well, get out of Hollywood and go back in time. Go back to 1950. Japanese movie called Rashomon. It was directed by Akira Kurosawa. It was actually the first Japanese movie to win the U.S. Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. And Rashomon is fascinating because it's a whodunit, but there's something very different about it. It takes place in, I think, 15th or 16th century Japan. And a man comes to the Rashomon Gate, I think it was outside of Tokyo, during the rain, and he finds two people there who are in a state of shock. They had just been part of an investigation, and it sort of left them emotionally damaged. And the story is then told in flashback. Apparently there had been a crime committed in the woods. A man and his wife were traveling through the woods. A bandit attacked them, raped the wife, and killed the husband. The problem is that there were four different versions of what took place. There was the bandit's version, where he's coming off as, he tells his version of what had happened, how he was able to single-handedly do all of this horrible stuff, and he was proud of it. But then the wife told her version of what had happened, and it's completely different from what the bandit told. And then a seance is heard, and the dead man's voice is heard, and he tells his version, which is different from the other two. And then one of the men who was at the Rashomon Gate was an eyewitness to what happened, and his version is different from the three that came before it. So you have basically these four main characters, but you don't really have the same character in each story. Each story, everyone is behaving in a very different manner. And at the end of the film, you're wondering, well, who's telling the truth? I mean, all four of them can't be right. And the beautiful thing, this is a spoiler alert, the beautiful thing about Rashomon is the film doesn't tell you who's telling the truth. It's up to you, the viewer, to figure out, well, whose version is correct? Are any of the versions correct, or what's going on here? And I remember the first time I saw the movie, which was, God, jeez, it would have been 30 years ago, first time I saw it. It was on VHS video when it first came out on video. I saw it at home, and I was actually walking around the living room of my apartment for about 15 minutes because I couldn't wrap my head around what I saw. It's just, I was expecting a usual mystery where you see what happened, you get the clues, and you try to figure out who did it. And here, you don't really have the clues because each version of what happened is so different, and at the end, you're just left hanging as to just, well, what happened at all? And to me, anybody who wants to be a fiction writer, certainly a mystery writer, watch Rashomon, because that's the textbook of how to blow people's minds.
That sounds awesome. I'm looking forward to checking out that film.
Check out the film. It's an extraordinary film.
Any other ones that you'd recommend?
I could be here all night, but I'll tell you, I mean, in terms of, this is just my opinion, and this is something you have to realize too as a writer, particularly if you're going to be doing criticism or commentary, which I do both. You can't be afraid to state your opinion. Granted, there's a right way and a wrong way to state an opinion. You don't want to come off as being a bore or a bloviator. But if you believe in something strong enough, either in a positive way or a negative way, you have to state it so people will understand where you're coming from. Maybe they'll agree with you, maybe they'll change their minds, but at least you give the idea of why you're thinking this way. You just can't come in and say, oh, this sucks, or oh, this is great, or oh, she's no good, or he's no good. You have to go into depth, and you have to explain yourself why you feel what you feel. And I think one thing with writers, my favorite writers are those who, when you pick up their work, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whether it's news or commentary, their voice is there. You can hear them speaking. And this carries over from book to book, from column to column, article to article. And there's a voice, it's a vibrant voice there. One of the best compliments I ever received in my life as a writer was, years ago, I wrote a letter to the editor that was published in Time magazine. And a friend of mine called me up and he said, I saw your letter in Time magazine. He said he just started reading the letter, and after the first two sentences, he didn't even see at the end where it came from. He said he knew from the first two sentences, Phil wrote that. And sure enough, he got to the end of the letter and it said, Phil Hall, New York, New York. And he recognized, and I didn't even tell him I was going to have a letter in Time, but he saw my voice in that letters column, and he recognized me immediately.
Mm-hmm. So you think that's what's important really about being a good writer is really finding your voice?
It's one of the many things that's important, but you have to have a voice, you have to have a personality, you have to connect with people. If you don't have that, particularly if you're trying to write books or be a fiction writer or be a columnist or be a commentator on some subject, whether it's politics, sports, arts, etc., your voice has to come out. You want to hear, people who come to me want to hear Phil speaking. As a writer, I want Tom's voice coming out. I mean, anybody could write a book on Facebook or Twitter, but you're an expert. You're speaking from a degree of expertise, and you're speaking with a very distinctive voice, and that's what puts your work separate from everybody else who's writing on the same subject.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, I think that was like a hard process for me to go through to actually find my voice because it was different than what everything else out there, right? And so when I first started writing, I would go to some of the top blogs or some of the top books, and I would be like, okay, I want to sound like Brian Tracy or Robert Kiyosaki or someone, and then I realized like, no, I need to just be myself and just write the way I would talk, like if I was talking to a good friend. And that for me has really helped me become a better writer. Just kind of like visualizing like I'm writing to my best friend, and this is how I'm gonna write this so that it's clear and it's me, and I'm not pretending to be someone else or something else.
That's right. Be yourself. I mean, because that's all you really can be. And if you're trying to be someone else or sound like somebody else, people will spot that immediately and they'll just turn off.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So in the film business, how is the question? I can't remember now. What was I going to say?
That's okay. Take a drink of water. I'll take one too for that matter. Cheers.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important to stay hydrated too, and that's one of the things because writing can be very stressful. And a lot of people don't realize that because especially if you're a journalist and you're on deadline, you have to get writing done by X hour. And if it's not, that's going back to my first story. I mean, I wound up doing film because I couldn't get that administrator at the school to speak to me. Now, I have a book that just came out, In Search of Lost Films. It was supposed to be out last year. And it wasn't because there was so much research that was involved. I misestimated how much time would be needed. So I was fortunate that my publisher, Bear Manor Media, was able to give me extensions in order to complete the book. Otherwise, another publisher might not have done that. And it was a very stressful period too, because I said to the publisher, I'm going to deliver a book to you on this date. And I have to come back saying, can I have an extension? And a few months later, can I have another extension? And I felt terrible about it. My publisher was Ben Omar, is his name. He's a cool guy. And he said, just take as much time as you want. And that was fine. But it was stressful to me because I wanted to get the work done on time, but I also wanted it done properly. I could have rushed the work, but I would have run the risk of having sloppy research and not very good writing. So in that sense, writing can be stressful because you want to submit something that is accurate, that is compelling, that's spelled correctly, obviously with the commas in the right place. And that takes a lot of planning and it takes a lot of focus and it takes a lot of physical and emotional strength to get that done.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah. I wanted to come back to a point that you made earlier in the interview, which was that like writing is hard on the body and the spirit is what you said. And yeah, I've been really more keenly aware of that in the past couple of months because, noticed like my back was getting sore and just spending too much time on the computer and, and I think this is a common trap that I think a lot of people are falling into, especially not just writers. I mean, anyone who works online or on the computer. It's easy to spend all day on the computer and then, do it again the next day and the next day and the next day and not take care of your body. So what are some things that you've done or that you've found that have really helped you take better care of your body and your spirit while you're working on the computer?
Well, have an ergonomically correct workstation, obviously, because if you're working on the computer, particularly a lot of the smaller laptops, your neck is creaked down and the eyes are constantly looking at that awful little screen and you're hunched over, and that's not the right way to sit at the computer. So basically set up a workstation where you're able to sit properly, have proper eye contact, it should be at least at arm's length from the screen. Get up every hour or so to move about because you could just as easily get caught up in your work and sit there hour after hour. And I've had that situation where sometimes I find myself at the desk 4 to 5 hours, and I get up and I'm so stiff, and I hate myself for it. And I say, no, don't do this. But I always wind up doing it again because you get caught up in your work that you don't move about. And it's also important to turn off the machine after a while. That's why machines come with on and off buttons and power buttons, because it's not supposed to be on 24/7. Same thing with your cell phone too. Unless there's an emergency, if you can turn it off for an hour or so, or just put it on the shelf, do so, because so many people are just so stuck to their devices, they don't see the world around them.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that. Do you do any writing or planning offline? And in other words, when you first sit down to write a new piece or a new book or article, whatever it is, do you just sit down on a blank screen and write, or do you have another process that you come up with first?
It depends on what I'm writing. If I'm doing a news article as a journalist, I have to get facts, so I make a lot of phone calls, speak to people. I like doing person-to-person interviews, which geographically we're not able to do today, hence this setup. But I'm in the New York City metro area, and I'm able to get not only through New York, but New Jersey, Connecticut, also go up to Boston sometimes, in Rhode Island, to do in-person interviews. I prefer that. I like to have eye contact, and I love to interact with people. You get a lot more out of that than by doing a phone and call, and certainly from an email or a text perspective too. In terms of the books that I've written, I've always had outlines before I go into something, and all of the books require research. So a lot of that is done offline. Some of it is done online, but I usually just don't sit down and start writing. Even if I'm doing commentary or criticism, I give a lot of thought before I write something. Try to speak lines out, which I feel, how will this sound? Go through a lot of rewrites too. There's nothing wrong with rewriting. In fact, it's probably the most important aspect of writing is rewriting. Get it down, see how it plays, read it out loud. How does it sound to you? And if it doesn't quite sound right, then don't be afraid to scrub it, or even just tear it up and start all over. I've done that several times.
Absolutely. So can you give some tips on the researching phase for folks who, haven't been, in the journalism world and haven't been trained by someone? How do you go about researching a story or an idea or a book?
Well, to research, there are several different ways. If I'm doing the books I've done have primarily been on film history. So I would go to sources that I know are credible sources. That's one of the problems with the internet, is there's a whole lot of stuff out there that is not correct. And in doing the current book that I have out, In Search of Lost Films, I had to verify certain things that had been urban legends in the film world. Very famous example, in the movie King Kong, there was a story about a sequence in the movie that apparently audiences, when they first saw it, were aghast in horror. This is when a bunch of the explorers fall into a valley, and giant spiders come and eat them, and apparently the audiences were so scared that the studio had to cut it out, and they threw out the footage. Well, I started doing more research into that, and I found out that that story wasn't true. In fact, the sequence was never in the finished film, and the only spider sequence was silent test footage that was made at the start of the production, which was never completed and never used. But over time, somehow this crazy story got to be considered a fact. So if I had put that into my book, I would have been perpetuating something which is not correct, which is obviously not the way to write a nonfiction book. In terms of doing research for articles that I'm doing, again, going to credible sources, established newspapers, established magazines, books that have gone out from professional publishing companies, not so much from self-publishers, unless you know that the writer who's self-publishing is a well-known expert on the field, and there are many of those. It takes time. We're recording this interview now, actually a day ahead of my 52nd birthday. So, and I've been doing this for over 30 years. So I'm still learning as well. You don't get to a point in your career where you're saying, aha, I've learned everything. I can't learn anything more. All the knowledge is in my head. I'm an expert. It doesn't work that way. Not as a writer, not as a human being. And that's one reason why I love being a writer, is because I'm constantly learning so much new stuff, and I'm meeting new people, and I'm absorbing new experiences. And for me, this is the best career imaginable.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that for sure. That's one of the things I love about writing as well, is that I'm constantly learning new things. And, I'm a very curious person as well. And so it just, I love to learn and I love to teach. And so for me, writing is that perfect mix. And I think a lot of our audience can relate to that as well. So Phil, this has been a great interview. I really appreciate all the wisdom and knowledge you shared with us. And before you go, can you tell us more about the work that you're doing right now and how people can find out more about you and connect with you?
All right. Well, as I said, my new book is called In Search of Lost Films. It was released in August. It's published by Bear Manor Media. You can find it on Amazon and all the usual online e-commerce book sites. I was recently named managing editor of filmsnobbery.com, which is a website where we write about Hollywood and independent films. I also write for Cinema Craze, which is another website as well. Outside of the film world, I'm writing business articles for National Mortgage Professional and for Profit Confidential. Both of them are online, obviously. I have a podcast on SoundCloud called The Online Movie Show with Phil Hall, where I talk about all sorts of aspects of the cinematic experience. And Tom, you were on the show talking about social media marketing, because a lot of people think, oh, show business is all about show. It's actually a business, and a lot of people don't understand that. So I was glad to have you as a guest to bring your expertise on social media marketing to the program. And as a person who has appeared in films, I'm in a documentary which is going to be coming out next year called Finding Kukan, which is about the effort to track down a long lost documentary. It actually was the first film to win the Best Documentary Oscar. It was called Kukan, Kukan. It was made in 1941. It was about the Chinese revolt against the Japanese occupation in World War II. The film disappeared for many years until a Hawaiian filmmaker named Robin Long located the last extant print. And she interviewed me for the film as an expert on where Kukan fits into the development of documentary filmmaking. So that film is having its premiere November at the, I think it was November. It's going to be at the in Hawaii at a film festival out there, and hopefully in 2017 we'll see it in theatrical or maybe on PBS release.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Phil. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that, and keep up the good work.